Majority of the vulnerabilities in MCP tool are in the description itself, like literally in the doc string. So you need to
Yeah.
make sure that it's not a part of the. There is already an AI security incident where somebody posed as a CFO, Chief Financial Officer of a company, and was able to siphon $25 million and authorize that payment just because.
Aryaman Behra is a CEO at Repello AI.
They had their cyber insurance binder unencrypted. And when the attacker found it, they read the policy. They probably fed it into ChatGPT. And within seconds, they knew how much the insurance company would pay out. The biggest vulnerability is sprawl.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of successful attacks take place because people forget their API endpoints are open. You don't even need to set up a proxy.
AJ is a field CISO, Chief Information Security Officer at Oracle.
There is a PDF file that has some sort of malicious component. It is kind of a LM virus, and you can plant it anywhere, and that can completely hijack. So AI security is going to be a crazy big market. There are multiple ways where you can make money.
I always say that the best leaders just find something that sucks and you find a way to make it suck less.
A very interesting statement, yeah. They evaluated the cost of attacking Anthropic to get the model weights. That cost is way higher than building your own AI model.
I come from an offensive security background and I've seen how attackers really work. We have to develop a mindset that attack is the best form of defense, and you need an attacker that chooses your side. In traditional pen testing, you fix the configuration, you fix some of the things in the code, and you can't sleep well at night. In the case of adversarial testing,
Maybe the business thought that was really boring. For an attacker, that's a really golden opportunity.
you can do a bunch of things to create fake trust.
Yeah.
Once you do that, you have enabled trust and credibility. People will download your WhatsApp MCP server, give it access of their WhatsApp chats to. So
Okay.
Razorpay recently launched their MCP servers.
Uh-huh.
That's like the India's first payment gateway.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it a snake oil.
Mm.
Originally, it was called when it was launched. The adoption is pretty good.
Aryavat, your mantra has been like attack is the best form of defense. That is at the core of Repello's approach. So, how does adversarial testing for Gen AI systems differ from the traditional penetration testing?
Okay, sure. So, of course, I believe so because I come from an offensive security background and I've seen how attackers really work. I have seen, how attackers leverage the dark web assets, how they leverage the new kind of assets, even the AI toolings in place in order to, create the existing attacks, increase the efficiency of the phishing campaigns that they run. We have to develop a mindset that attack is the best form of defense, and you need an attacker that chooses your side. That's very important here.
Yeah.
So, as a part of the adversarial testing and difference between like traditional pen testing, that differs by a lot. Why? Mainly, in very short, it's deterministic versus probabilistic. In traditional pen testing, there's a very deterministic code that, okay, here is the raw code and here is the predictable output. And
Yeah.
if this goes wrong, this happens. You fix the configuration, you fix some of the things in the code, and you're broadly sorted. You can't sleep well at night. In the case of adversarial testing, it's not the same. We
Yeah.
all know about the famous example where, like Waymo cars suddenly accelerated a bit because they misinterpreted a signal like that was actually supposed to be a stop sign, but they misinterpreted it as like 40 miles per hour, like speed sign or something, and it exceeded. Now, that is adversarial testing. That's not specific to generative AI, but yeah, it is some sort of adversarial testing.
Yeah.
You can't do that in traditional pen testing, right? It's very, very different.
Yeah.
You're talking about a different kind of attacks altogether. Even in the case of generative AI, of course, it shares a bit of traditional AppSec where you can chain prompt injections in order to escalate it to server-side request forgery. That is a combination of generative AI testing, adversarial testing, plus, traditional AppSec. But I think the first step is always some sort of adversarial testing here in order to figure out the probabilistic nature of this whole application stack. Like Gen AI is one of the component of this whole application stack.
Yes,
It's
yes,
not the
definitely. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that is why it needs a different approach. And it's evident from the fact that the customers we were work with, the first question we asked them was like, we found this issue. Was your traditional DAS kind of tools, the application security tools, was it able to detect the same kind of issues? And they were like, okay, not even close, because that was not the focus area. So of course it requires a different kind of toolings altogether.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, whatever works the best in this AI age, we should use it for AI
Yeah,
security. So,
for sure.
AJ, coming back to you, how does this offensive security mindset fit within larger enterprise security frameworks, since you are a part of one?
Yeah, I mean, I think people need to remember that, right? So I
Yeah.
I came across two really interesting things recently that, it's funny you kind of go you start and it's like, okay, security needs to be built around the business. And then you're like,
Mhm.
wait, but what about the attackers? And then like, what about the
Yeah.
business? And then what about the attackers? And then like
Yeah.
you settle somewhere in the middle. Like it's got to be a balance of both.
Yeah.
But the two things that I came across recently are this. Recently, a colonel from the Rhode Island National Guard, who's now a CISA guy, was talking about a situation where CISA helped this company who fell victim to ransomware. And what was really interesting about this particular attack is they had all kinds of stuff hardened. They did like a really good job with their defensive security posture from a business standpoint, but they had their cyber insurance binder unencrypted. And when the attacker found it, they read the policy, and I mean, they probably fed it into ChatGPT, let's be honest. And within seconds, they knew how much they would pay out. The insurance company would pay out. So it's like 2 million. So the attacker's like 1.5 million. And then they knew like a week later they get paid. So coming from a business standpoint, what does that mean for the business? Are you still insurable? What does this mean for your insurance rate? Does it still make sense to do risk transfer, or do you, like, now are you in a different spot? So, well, first off, I feel like a lot of people forget that cyber insurance is like any other type of insurance. It's not going to always be there for you. But taking a step back and thinking like an attacker, maybe the business thought that was really boring. They're like, I pity whoever has to read this insurance policy. For an attacker, that's a really golden opportunity. So I think that's an indicator that as people protecting businesses, we need to adopt an attacker standpoint and say, what could someone do with this? Outside of the regulated data and outside of like the company intellectual property. And the other thing that really struck me, and this is so silly. Recently, I was talking to a company that was doing like clone your environment and run AI attacks against it, and I think that's very cool. And they did a demo and they chained vulnerabilities together in an attack, just like an attacker would. And something that I found so silly is when we all learned pen testing, like I probably learned it in like 2017, 2018, and it was, like use Nmap and scan for services and vulnerabilities, and then when you find one, you point Metasploit at it, and then when you pop that box, then you do the same thing again. You enumerate the network internally, you find a vulnerability, and you point Metasploit at it. And the barrier to entry there is so low because you don't even need to know how to code. You just need to like work with Metasploit, which is not hard. But as defenders, we weren't thinking like that. Like if you run a vulnerability scanning tool, it'll be like this vulnerability is a medium, but it doesn't consider it within the broader context of other vulnerabilities that are proximate to it. It might, within these scanners, you can weight it based on business criticality, but that's so myopic because if you have three medium vulnerabilities that can be chained together to get domain admin, all of a sudden, maybe that's like a critical path. So I love that we are getting to the point as defenders where we're more informed by attacker methodologies, but looking back and seeing how we've been defending versus how we've been learning to attack, I don't understand what took us so long. And I think in recognizing that there's an opportunity to prevent ourselves from lagging so far behind as we move forward.
Yeah, I agree. And putting on the attacker hat always helps to think it from the other perspective and making our systems as secure as possible. So, AJ, you recently spoke on a panel about AI security is the gateway drug to API security. That's a fascinating perspective. So, what are the top API specific threats emerging as organizations are integrating LLMs and AI agents into their infrastructure? And how should security teams adapt their playbooks?
That's a great question. Thank you. I'd say there's really two issues. It's API sprawl. As we're accelerating the rate at which we're deploying capabilities and applications and integrations, a lot of those things happen with APIs and AI agents. And these systems are set up with the best of intentions, but they are turbocharged to make decisions, and they will make decisions rapidly. So it's really important to think about how we're going to keep up with monitoring that, because if you're not monitoring something, you can't protect it.
Yes,
And
exactly.
I guess what feels so daunting about that is it's always been hard to keep an inventory, whether it's asset inventory back in the day of like a knack, like an asset would always fall off of the knack and then it would fall off of AV protection and then that was the device that got the ransomware.
Yeah.
And then you move to cloud and now all of a sudden you have people spinning up VCNs and other environments that they forget about. And maybe you have quad zero route tables, so
Yeah.
that's going to come back and haunt you. And so we've moved from that on-prem NAC-oriented environment where asset inventories were a challenge to cloud environment where the velocity changed and the sprawl became more of a challenge. And now we're moving at the speed of code and computation, which can be difficult to comprehend for humans, at least this human.
Yes. Yeah.
And with that acknowledgement, how do we need to really think about how we're going to keep up with the monitoring and the life cycle, making sure we sunset things properly and validate that things are sunset. And then from the more specific vulnerability part, BOLA, we've really done a great job in the industry in terms of standardizing authentication. We have OAuth, we have federated SSO.
Yeah.
We know that identity is important, but your
Mm.
identity doesn't matter if authorization isn't enforced. So it used to be, once you compromised an environment, you had to get root because you needed those admin privileges to conduct your actions on the objective. But now, if you don't have to be root, if you can take advantage of a failed authorization opportunity for an object, for an AI agent, for an API, that can really give you the keys to the kingdom. And that does a few things. It accelerates the speed of an attack. It opens it to automation and it lowers the barrier to entry because, you hear a lot of pen testers like, oh, I got into this environment, but I had trouble making root. Well, you don't even need that anymore. So
Yes.
that's something that I find very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So, this new hot topic, MCP, Model Context Protocol. Everyone is trying to learn what the hell is MCP. So, let's talk about that. So, Aryaman, your blog on MCP tool poisoning raises concerns about execution risks. As we move toward more agentic AI, that we are, of course, moving.
Yeah.
So, with the capability to use computer tool use and everything, what new security paradigms might be needed? And just for my audience, think of MCP like a USB-C port for AI applications. So just as USB-C provides a standardized way to connect your devices to various peripherals and accessories, MCP provides a standardized way to connect AI models to different data sources and tools like calculator, web search. So yeah, over to you, Ariman.
Sure, sure. So thanks for like summarizing about the NCP bit for your audience. It is truly the USB-C of our AI
Mhm.
era that we're talking about here. It enables a lot of interoperability that was not
Mhm.
previously possible.
Yeah.
Now, virtually what I could see is that, like after a few months or so, my Uber application might be talking to my Google Calendar, which might be connected to that, okay, what are the meetings that I have in place, which might be
Yeah.
talking to my, I don't know, like AI executive assistant app, and they would be all coordinating with me to finally book an Uber for me and even like facilitate the payment
Mm.
and
Yes.
everything. Now there is a lot of data in this one scenario. There is a lot of data sharing that is happening between multiple applications, and this all of the data is private data. It's not
Yeah.
something that is
Yeah.
open to the public or should be open to the public. Not even the model providers. How do you keep that everything secure on device, on the edge, or on the cloud? There's a huge paradigm of new kind of attacks that are coming up. In the blog that we released a couple of weeks back about MCP tool poisoning to RC, it's not just about the technical vulnerability, but also about a lot of psychological human triggers that
Mm.
people do in order to, like use MCP. For example, if you've used MCP, you know that it always keeps probing you to allow for giving access to the tool. Now, in
Yes.
hindsight, you might feel that, it's awesome. It's asking me every time in order to,
Yeah.
use this tool. But there is something called permission fatigue. Now, what that means is if it's asking you time and again to click allow, allow,
Uh-huh.
and if it asks you 10 times, maybe there would
Do
be
not
one
show this
time where,
again, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Or, just allow it to run like without any
Yeah.
human in the loop.
Permission. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, in those 10 times it asks you to accept and allow the permission to the tool, there might be one time where it is actually malicious, where it's asking you for like read write access to your terminal. And
Mhm.
that is what can also lead to a lot of exfiltration of something like very sensitive like S6 keys. that might eventually lead to RCE, like remote code execution. Now, this seems to be like a very scary thing that, okay, I don't want any untrusted MCP server to be running. But if you think about that, how do
You
humans
implement.
trust?
Yeah,
How do
exactly.
humans trust, right? They
Yeah.
trust based on the GitHub stars, they based on number of Hugging Face downloads,
Yeah.
and these metrics can be faked in current date. That you can have the bot-led marketing, you can increase the number of GitHub stars, you can do a bunch of things to create that fake trust.
Yeah.
Once you do that, you have enabled trust and credibility. People will download your WhatsApp MCP server, give it access give it access of their WhatsApp chats to your MCP server, which
Yeah.
you might be exfiltrating and enjoying viewing someone's chats on the back end.
Yeah.
And there you have an MCP attack. So organizations who are building MCP servers need to ensure that the code is audited very thoroughly. There is no rug pull attack or tool poisoning attack that is possible in there. And the users of MCP, like the MCP clients, need to make sure that the MCP server that they're interacting with is safe and secure. Majority of the vulnerabilities in MCP tools are in the description itself, like literally in the doc string. So you need to
Yeah.
make sure that it's not a part of the code that you need to test, but the code doc string that you need to check. And every time there's a tool/list description call that you need to make to the MCP servers to make sure it's the same as the one you called it last time. So that's going to be very important going ahead in the future.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, in your experience working with your clients so far, how has been the adoption of MCP? Like, are
Pretty good
people
actually.
pretty good?
Pretty good, yeah. So
Okay.
Razorpay recently launched their MCP servers.
Uh-huh.
That's like the India's first payment gateway. There
Yeah.
are a couple companies in the US as well. They have actively started launching their MCP servers. Even the startups, they want to make sure that the dashboard. Nobody wants a 31st dashboard, right? And AJ, you
Yeah.
might be able to confirm that. There is so many dashboards, so many toolings out there. Everyone's overwhelmed. So of course,
Yeah.
MCP does help in solving a lot of those problems. And it's not just a snake oil. I wouldn't call it a snake oil which
Mm.
originally it was called, when it
Yeah.
was launched. The adoption is pretty good.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, even I was frustrated with dashboards whenever I used to serve on call for my
Yeah.
previous company. So I know the nightmare that dashboards
Yeah.
gave
There you
me.
go.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So this question is for both of you. Like, what happens when a company like OpenAI or Anthropic has their model weights stolen, and what are the technical and business implications of getting this scenario?
Sure.
Just open-ended question.
Oh yeah, sure, sure, sure.
Yeah.
No, of course they wouldn't want that to happen. We have seen a series
Yes.
of things where
Mm-hmm.
the model weights of GPT-2 was leaked and eventually then it had to be open source. Similar trade
Mm-hmm.
what played out with
Yeah.
other companies as well
Mm.
when Llama came into picture. Of course, model weight leaking is not something that you should be able to ignore.
Yeah.
But so far, I think it is actually closer to a data security problem.
Mm.
You wouldn't want the model weights to be leaked. But at the same time, you won't want to keep it so much, like for a company like OpenAI that is not so much building into open source, but
Mm.
has some of the bits open source.
Yeah.
They don't want the model weights to leak. While
Yeah.
similar to something called Llama, that they have a different objective altogether. They have a different
Yes.
way of going to market,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
for them, it's a very different, like the priorities wouldn't be the same. For
Yeah.
Anthropic, it would be the highest priority ever.
Priority, yeah. And of
So
course, they have been vocal about compartmentalization
yeah, yeah,
within their organization of like having very few number of employees having
exactly.
access to those secrets.
Yeah,
So that's one way. And also, I heard Dario Amodei a year back or something. They evaluated the cost of attacking Anthropic to get the model weights. That cost is way higher than building your own AI model. So, of course, in terms of business, also it doesn't make sense for an attacker or a state actor to do that.
yeah,
What's your take, AJ, on this?
Well, I guess that the chief business risk that stands out to me in terms of people stealing your model weights is the basic intellectual property risk.
Hmm.
For me, I think more about maintaining the integrity of model weights. I wonder if, or if maybe it's already happened. Savvy attackers are able to tamper with those model weights and what that could mean for outputs and what that could mean for users of these models that, a lot of people do offload their cognitive load onto LLMs and
yeah,
don't check their output. And the output of that person's business function is someone else's input. And so if the next person in the chain does the same, same, there can be a lot of bad information out there and a lot of important decisions being made from bad information from that integrity standpoint. So I guess that's something that I'm concerned about and curious about.
Got it. Got it. Moving to next question on watermarking AI generated content. So while companies like Google have invested heavily in watermarking AI generated content through synthid, like for text, images, videos, and these watermarks are imperceptible, even though they remain vulnerable to manipulation or removal. So Ariman, like what technical approaches might make these watermarks more robust? And yeah, let's come back to AJ after this. Yeah.
To be very honest and like bluntly honest, it's a very hard problem to solve. It's not easy.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
companies coming up claiming to have solved this, but
Hmm.
there are always workarounds. And from an
Yes.
attacker perspective, they just need one way in order to
Yeah.
break that,
Yeah.
this whole watermarking approach. From a
Yes.
defender's point of view, who are working on this watermarking,
Hmm.
it's like they have to protect every single one of time, and it's tough.
Hmm.
It's not easy. Even if somebody comes up with me and they tell me that, okay, here is a way where we have figured out a network where
Hmm.
here is the application that will create the watermark,
Hmm.
and there is another application that will verify if this thing is watermarked or not. There is
Yeah.
AC2PA and there are a couple of
Hmm.
standards coming up,
Yeah. Yeah.
but who is evaluating this? So when you
Yes.
get something like a WhatsApp forward or something like that,
Hmm. Yeah.
or they have been trying to put some watermarks. Like if you're a Samsung user, whenever you create an image using AI, there is a small like AI generated watermark in the bottom left that
Yeah.
mentions it's AI generated. But what if I just crop it out?
Crop it out. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Exactly.
works.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think there are a couple of research that is also coming up that is like instigating some watermark on the pixel level. That
Yes. Yes.
if this is something that is AI generated, then
Hmm.
on the pixel level, you will be able to, somehow identify
Hmm.
that, okay, it is AI generated and it's not something that is like naturally created or naturally captured.
Hmm.
There are always workarounds around that as well. If you change a bit of resolution, if you change a
Yeah.
bit of like pixel mappings around here and there.
Yeah.
I have my friend who works in forensics, so I was having a deep conversation with him someday, and it was
Hmm.
like there is always possible to like configure and tamper with the exist configurations of that.
Yeah.
And when you go to that kind of level, it's not easy to like really
Yeah.
always validate from 100% fact that okay, it is AI generated and I'm
Hmm.
talking about majorly images here, not talking
Yeah,
about text.
yeah.
For
Text
text,
is
it's
the hardest to watermark. That's what I have felt like
yeah,
in my research journey with watermarking AI generated
yeah,
content.
yeah.
So yeah, and even with videos also, it's easy because it's frame by frame kind of a thing. So it's easy to manipulate, of course. What's
Hmm.
your take, AJ? Like, how should enterprises evolve their security frameworks to protect these watermarking systems as critical infrastructure rather than just optional features that we are using?
Watermarking concept isn't something I've researched and it's new to me. Can you help me
Yeah.
understand
Okay.
the purpose of it? Is it intellectual property protection or is it something else?
Yeah, so it's basically to identify human generated content from
Mhm.
AI generated content. So that's the basic purpose of it. Of course,
Okay.
there are like no cheating in the student scenario and stuff like that, but basically it's that identification. Yeah.
I think Ashka, what you mentioned was like deepfakes is a very big concern here as well because I think there is already an AI security incident where
Yeah.
somebody posed as a CFO, Chief
Mhm.
Financial Officer of a company, and was able to siphon $25 million and
Yeah.
authorize that payment just because
Yeah.
that person showed up in a Zoom call. That was a
Yeah.
series of like deepfake plus
Mm.
social engineering, and
Mm.
like somehow
Yes.
they got
Yes.
access to it. So $25 million was the cost of that loss. And we will
Yeah.
be seeing more of those scenarios coming up in the future as,
Yeah. Yeah.
the gap between AI generated content and like the
Hmm.
real content, like
Yeah.
decreases.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so
Yes.
that's really interesting. I feel like for companies, just having basic like you need multi parties to agree to something before going
Mhm.
forward makes it much more difficult. So
Yeah.
for example, if the CEO and then the CFO has to sign off on it and legal has to sign off on it, it's like it's one of those things where in the public sector we have this bureaucracy, but it's because we have that bureaucracy that we're less likely to deal with this particular
Right.
threat. So I think there is an opportunity there, not necessarily to bog private companies down with unnecessary bureaucracy, but to consider some checks and balances to make it more difficult for these things to happen. That way you can prevent some of them, but also when it inevitably does occur, if somebody really wants to do it, they're going to figure it out. That way when somebody says to you, what did you do to prevent this? You have something like coherent to provide that makes some sense. But I guess with this newfound understanding of watermarking, thank you for explaining it to me, Ashka. To me,
Yeah.
I think of national security threats,
Yeah.
Yeah.
misinformation, disinformation. I see that as
Yes.
the number one problem. So how do
Problem. Yeah.
nation states protect themselves?
Yeah.
Honestly, I wonder if nation states had these technologies like in the 80s when I was born. And
Mm.
they've already been kind of working toward this arms race of, what we're seeing now with these LLMs has maybe existed in the military for 20, 30 years.
Mm.
Probably, there's probably things going on behind the scenes at the nation state level, or at least I'd like to hope there are, to prevent some of the disastrous consequences that you can certainly think of when we think about, what if we have these forged videos of leaders doing all kinds of things. I don't want to give
Yeah.
anybody any ideas, but I'm sure people
Yeah.
are a lot more creative than I am with that
Yes.
regard.
Yes.
But yeah, I guess the concerns about what could happen in corporations for me are much smaller than what could happen, in
Nationwide. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. And of course, misinformation, disinformation are the scenarios or incidents that watermarking is like trying to solve. And also, in addition to watermarking AI generated content, as Aryaman mentioned about the provenance, companies have formed the coalition, like where did the deepfake or the fake news originate from, finding the source and just like eliminating those kind of, or maybe like coming up with more information and adding to the metadata of the content. So that is what provenance coalition that Microsoft, Adobe, and other companies are working towards. So yeah, it's like a mix of a lot. It's not a one shot solution to the big problem of misinformation or disinformation. Let's move on to the next question. AJ, if organizations could implement one security practice to, of course, there are a lot, but one master stroke security practice to protect their AI systems, what would you recommend as the highest impact action that they should take today?
I would say discovery and inventory. It's just like the foundational step, basic cyber hygiene. It's boring, but if
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like it's one of those domains where if you can really nail the basics, everybody's
Mhm.
worried about 0 days and stuff like that. Honestly,
Complexities. Yeah.
90% of attacks, if you just know what's out there so that you can monitor it and you can sunset it, you're going to avoid 90% of your bad days.
Yeah.
That's right. I
That,
completely agree.
yeah, that's a powerful advice. Aryaman, what's the single most overlooked security step that every AI startup should prioritize from day one, and why?
Authorization and access control, and
Uh-huh.
second being denial of wallet. These are the
Okay.
top two big ones that hamper the data security and also the infrastructure. Like you don't want AI is expensive to run, it's not cheap,
Yes.
and you don't
Yeah.
want to run on of those precious like OpenAI
Resources.
credits that you have
Yeah.
in place. So
Yeah.
and as startups we tend to ignore that very often. That okay we are provided with $100,000 of AWS cloud credits
Hmm.
and GCP credits, so we just
Yeah.
tend to overlook at it that okay it's
Hmm.
there, it's
Hmm.
abundant, but it's not really there.
Yeah. 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 Makes a lot of sense. Again, to both of you, like what's one AI security threat that is not getting enough attention today, but will definitely define the next wave of breaches or failures in the AI systems or AI agents altogether?
Sure. So personally, I think indirect prompt injection is still a very unsolved problem that
Mm.
you upload, there is a PDF file that has some sort of malicious component where it is in like let's say a white font that is not visible to human eyes, but it is visible to the, LLMs will be processing that file. It is kind of a LLM virus and you can plant it anywhere. And that will, when processed by the LLM, can completely hijack the workflow of the initial goal and
Mm.
steer away the LLM from what it's originally supposed to be done, change the tone, and do a couple of things that completely disrupt the integrity of that whole application. It still remains one of the biggest AI security threat. You
Mm.
need to have guardrails for that. You need to have some sort of right access controls, right whitelisting to be done in place. One of the customer engagements of red teaming, what our product was able to find in an automated fashion was that a chatbot was redirecting the users to a competitor to a markdown link for an injection. Now, of course, you can say you can use LLMs to make it say poems about the competitor and basic stuff, but that's not the real security threat. That's safety threat. But redirecting user to an external link that could be a phishing site, that could be a competitor, that could be
Mm.
linked to an unsubscribed link.
Hmm.
You wouldn't want
Yeah.
that to happen.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Making up poems is kind of a good way to teach about AI threats, but it's not the real threat to a startup or a organization. So,
right.
what's your take, AJ?
Sure, I would say the biggest vulnerability is sprawl. We've
Yeah.
seen a lot of successful attacks take place because people forget their API endpoints are open. And
Mm,
I think we're going to see a lot of that with AI agents and using
yeah.
APIs to get to AI
Everything is
agents.
API call, right? With
Exactly,
them.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, I think we've really struggled to do a good job keeping track of our APIs, and I think that kind of leads the foundation to all of these AI tools and capabilities being on top of something that we haven't really gotten a good grasp on already. I think that that will be the big challenge in terms of vulnerabilities and in terms of the threats, who can take advantage of that. The barrier to entry is so low. Like you can scan for an
Yeah.
open API endpoint. You don't even need to set up a proxy. You can just do it with
Mm.
PowerShell or Python. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah.
I think that not only is the sprawl easy to lose track of and difficult to
Yeah.
monitor, but it's also really easy for people to go after, even people who are new.
Yeah, yeah. That's a powerful thing to think about. Aryaman, in your LinkedIn posts, you speak to fellow young founders saying your age is not a bug, it's a feature. So, what advice do you have for our young entrepreneurs who are looking to break into AI security space when they are competing against these established players like AJ? So, what's your advice to those young entrepreneurs?
So I think, of course, the reason when I said it's not a bug, it's a feature, is
Mm,
because it allows you to have a lot of those raw thoughts and to
mm,
experiment with that. When you have
yeah.
spent some time in the industry, you have kind of, you've seen the patterns. So the way of thinking, the way to approach any new problem is kind of defined. But when
Mm,
you're starting from scratch, that with that kind of energy, with the kind
mm,
of, you can operate in a very lean manner. You don't have to have tons of resources, tons of team behind you to actually accomplish something. You can learn anything, you can learn, unlearn very fast. Now
yeah.
that enables you to iterate very, very fast. And
Mhm.
if anyone wants to break into AI security, the first recommendation would be differentiate yourself from the existing players, because there's a lot of overload of AI security companies coming up, and it's very hard for even the CISOs that I'm talking to differentiate that what are the, you know, how do you differentiate yourselves from the other competitors in Israel, US, India, and like how do you differentiate yourselves? It
Mhm.
could be like you are going after a certain market, you're going after a certain vertical, you're going after, like a certain use case, like a point solution that you only do red teaming, you're not into guardrails, you're not into compliance. You could build a platform. There are various different ways you can build a business. I know a lot of folks who are, because there's a lot of demand for AI security engineers, people are
Mm.
actively hiring for AI safety, AI governance, things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
They are actively starting agencies who
Mm.
are helping to fill the job roles. That's how they're making money. So AI security is going to be a crazy big market. There are multiple ways where you can make money by riding the opportunity of AI security.
Yes, definitely. So, what's the differentiation point for Repello? Like, how have you differentiated Repello AI from the other players in the
Oh,
market?
that's my favorite question. So,
Of course.
usually the way we differentiate ourselves from anybody else in the player is that we have been into AI rating for 2 years now. The kind of
Mm.
companies that we work with across domains, we have a lot of AI specific threat intelligence in place.
Mm.
And not to boast, but it's actually the best offensive security, threat intelligence repository in AI specific applications. Now, what I mean by that is we have red teamed plenty of AI applications, and we are aware about the malicious prompts or the malicious failure modes that can happen to any application in a certain domain, in a certain deployment. And when you accumulate all of that intelligence and put an offensive security engine behind it, give it a bunch of toolings, give it access to do things in a malicious manner. And we have built our own orchestration engine for that. That is the biggest differentiation. But I think in cybersecurity, that is the product part. That is just half, that is 50% problem. But the
Mhm.
other part is also credibility and trust. Now,
Mm.
because we have worked with customers across domains, they refer us to their own network.
Domain
And that
per.
is the mode, that is the trust mode that I'm trying to crack.
Mm.
And I think no tech mode, no data mode beats the trust mode.
Yeah,
And we're optimizing
definitely.
for that.
Even with AI also, we are trying to solve the trust problem.
Yeah,
So that's a powerful advice.
there we go.
Coming to you, AJ, what's your advice to someone who is looking to become a security leader in 2025? Like, apart from all the politics and everything that happens in an organization, but like, how can they establish themselves as security leaders?
I always say that like the best leaders just find something that sucks and you find a way to make it suck less.
Yeah,
So if you
that's a very interesting statement. Yeah.
so if you can do that, if you can just get out there and you're in an
Mhm,
organization and you're like, man, like what really sucks? Like what do you really hate doing within this
mhm,
specific domain and like what do you hate about it? And if you
mm,
can find a way to improve it, make it better in some way, to Aryaman's point, like that also builds trust.
mm,
A lot of times, and going back to something that I said earlier, like CISO's always saying, like, no, you can't do this new thing. Look to be, and like, don't be a doormat, but try to
mm.
find that balance of trying to enable that business growth because ultimately your job security and compensation is contingent upon that business growth and your
Yeah.
ability to lift other people up, provide jobs, provide promotions for your team for people who deserve it. It depends on your business growing. So you have a vested interest in that business growing and growing securely. So help the business grow and look for opportunities to make things better because that'll help with your team retention. And
Mm.
I also think that a lot of people don't realize what it takes to train up somebody new and hire. Sometimes you hire
Yeah,
somebody that seems great and they're kind of a dud, or
Yeah.
vice versa. You could hire somebody like, man, I'm really taking a risk on this person. It's the best risk you'll ever get.
Yeah.
So really think about how your actions impact other people, and that's really at the core of building your network, building trust, building your portfolio, and building your character.
Yeah, yeah. Those are very powerful mindsets for security leaders to have. Like, can you point specific skills that can help people become better security leaders? Because CISO's roles are more than in demand in 2025 than it was previously. So, are there any proper skills that you would recommend?
Just knowing yourself, know what you're bad at, and decide if you're going to fix it or rely on your teammates for it. And
Yeah.
that's such an important. You can't be great at everything, but
Yes,
when
definitely.
you
Yeah.
have either colleagues across teams or members of your own team that are great at something
Mhm.
that you're bad at, that's awesome because you can let them shine, right? Like you
Yeah.
can provide them that opportunity, give them
Mhm.
credit, incentivize them, make them feel valued, and then you don't have to do that thing and you don't have to do it poorly. Know yourself and be honest with yourself about what you're good at and what you're not. And then the other thing is, I'll try to avoid a hot take, but even as somebody who's pivoted from a non technical domain, I felt as though it was very important to understand the technical aspect of things. I know that there's a huge movement where everyone's like, go be a CISO. You don't need to know the
Yeah.
technology. I mean, you don't need to, but
Mm.
why do you want to lead
Want
a
to pick.
technical team if you don't care?
Yeah.
So you don't have to go out there and be a hacker man or hacker girl.
Ah,
But just
yeah.
going out there and trying things will give you a perspective to understand what your staff is doing,
Mm.
how things work, and understanding that attacker perspective and understanding the tool sets that it's your job to protect them.
Mm.
If you're a CISO and you fire up a command line and it scares the crap out of you, commands are two letters like LS. Like, congratulations, go ahead and try it because honestly, there's so much
Mm.
stuff to do in this industry. Like, there's just a new way to fall in love with it every single day. Don't let that go to waste.
Yeah, yeah, that's a powerful advice. And to sum it up, like do a proper SWOT analysis of yourself and your team, and you can work around the roles and the responsibilities and the tools. So definitely, it's a powerful advice. We are just in time completing this episode. So thank you so much for joining us on a Friday. And let me stop the recording.